Welcome back to See Today Business. Now, Southeast Asia aims to achieve 23% renewable energy in its primary energy supply and 35% installed capacity by 2025. Meanwhile, Indonesia aspires to increase the share of renewables in its primary energy mix to 17% to 19% by 2025. However, securing funding has been a major key challenge to accelerate the country's energy transition. How can Indonesia and Southeast Asia find the capital to fund their energy transition, all while balancing its economic and social needs? To learn more about this topic, we are already here with Mr. Enda Ginting, the Country Manager of Indonesia at Gurin Energy. Good afternoon, Mr. Enda.
Good afternoon.
We are so honored to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so now let's talk a bit about Indonesia's energy transition. As we know that Indonesia is currently undergoing a major transition to renewable energies. So what kind of opportunities and challenges that you see here, especially when related to its financing?
Interesting question. I think you're asking about the opportunities. Allow me to cluster it. One, this is a country, and in the region, it's growing at an impressive amount of economic growth. We're talking about 5 to 6%. That also talks about the future use. Second part, I think this country has a lot of abundance of renewable energy, hydropower, geothermal, solar PVs, wind. There's been various reports that says it's it's in the level of the 100 gigawatts. So these two combined alone provide an opportunity for the right appetite of investors and IPPs to come and want to support the country's energy transition. More importantly, the last cohort, I think, the government itself already pledged itself to want to transition by a particular date, into what kind of economy. So for anyone, especially for us in Gurin, we look at that as an opportunity that welcomes independent power producers such as Gurin ourselves.
Okay, and let's talk about Southeast Asia in a broader context. How do you see the opportunities and challenges in energy transition and also sustainable finance landscape across this region?
That's an interesting question. In the region on Southeast Asia and also on sustainable finance, I think this is a very interesting region because you're looking at countries like Indonesia and Philippines who've got a projected growth rate of about 4, 5, 6, 7%. Malaysia alone, Singapore alone. We see that this is the upfront needed transition for a lot of reasons. One, all of the countries in the region have pledged itself politically and technocratically to want to transition. And it's growing at a very fast rate. We have a total of around 7 gigawatts across the region. We have a standalone battery energy storage project at scale in Japan. We have around 1 giga pipeline in the Philippines. We are working on several projects in Thailand and now in Indonesia, which is a big project that we're working on. So this alone is a testimony that the region is transitioning. Those who are able to digest the local opportunities are able to jump in. Now, when we talk about sustainable finance, I think one, there is a need for the finance to go into projects that are more sustainable because it's pretty hard for the bankers to then go into non-sustainable projects. We see that the governments in the region, especially in Indonesia and even the Philippines, are starting to build a metric on sustainability. So there are moving parts, and we would like to harness this opportunity in co-support with the government initiative.
And there has been some frustration regarding funding for energy transition, as we talked about before. How do you see the blended finance? Do you see it as a sustainable solution? And if so, how important is the private sector's role in blended finances?
I think there's two parts to your question on the importance of blended finance and the importance of what are viable projects in country. There is an overarching theme, which is any country, especially like Indonesia, who wants to transition, they have to do it justly. So it's not something that can happen overnight, over a year, and they have to transition that carefully. We also believe that blended finance is always going to be needed to reduce the cost of borrowing but the role of the commercial banks is always going to be needed. Towards the frustration, I think it talks about the appetite. Countries like Indonesia and the Philippines have very different regimes and different ways of how it wants to transition. Clearly, it's doing at a pace that is acceptable and it's actually doing good. However, there will be a natural selection process into that. Not all of the projects are viable, and the Indonesian energy market is different with that, and the Philippines is different with that.
How do you see the development of sustainable finance landscape in Indonesia compared to other countries in the region?
It's probably hard for me to comment on what other countries are doing, but personally, my view, I am seeing a lot more sustainable finance. There has been one taking place in 2016. There are transaction financing projects that are sustainable. Ours is a very good example. It's a cooperation between two governments, and we are looking at the financiers who are making sure that this is sustainable, a sustainable project.
And now let's move on to talk more about Gurin Energy. So Gurin Energy's goal is to move Asia to 100% renewable energy. How will the technological solutions that you develop will help reach this goal?
Very good question. Let me adjust that. Gurin is doing our part to help Asia transition to renewable energy, because the region is growing, and as that growth happens, so will the demand for power. I think we're a very young company, but we are based on a wealth of knowledge in renewables. Our founders have established more than 5 gigawatts in the past in the region. We have a pipeline of 7 gigawatts in the region. We are doing things that co-support the government, but if we take a step back, we see that the cost of infrastructure for renewable energy has experienced a huge decline over the last decade, around 75 to about 80%, depending on how you measure it. We are also seeing that investments have grown in renewable energy, and solar panels in what we're doing right now in Indonesia have also increased in the region by around, or globally by around 11 or 12 times. So technology does play an important factor, and being able to grasp and understand and access this is important.
And in 2023, Gurin Energy signed an agreement on the cooperation between Indonesia and Singapore to enable the trading of green electrons through the Green Corridor Indonesia project. Can you please tell us more about this project and your specific role on this collaboration?
So what I can share with you on this signing of an MOU is it's an agreement between two countries who've agreed to share electrons, green electrons, and it's part of the Singaporean government to ensure that they too are transitioning. We have received conditional approval from the Singaporean authorities. We are in progress of developing the Indonesian side. With the support of both governments, we are grateful for that, because this is a very unique collaboration between the Singaporean government, Indonesian government, and the private sectors involved. And we are looking forward to progressing this even faster. And I actually would invite you and everyone else to keep an eye on this, because this is a cornerstone, an important mark between the two countries, not just in terms of trade and investment, but also in terms of renewable energy and transition to renewable energy.
Now, still related to the project, it is reported that you are planning to build a solar power plant in Riau, Indonesia, to further export the energy to Singapore. And how do you ensure that this project will not harm the social, ecological, and local economic aspects within the locations? Because we know that often the case, transition to renewables comes at certain sociological and ecological cost, especially when we look at certain cases in Indonesia.
Very interesting question. I think I'm aware of a specific case you're talking about. Let me say first up front, in Gurin, the governance, society, and the social impacts and the environment is hard to our business. It's not just a corporate credo that we run, that we do, we actually live by it. More importantly, we always consult the local communities and get them involved as high as possible, because they are at the heart of our project. We believe in that, we action that. There are requirements legally. For instance, in the Indonesian side, there's AMDAL, and then there are larger requirements such as EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment, We're doing both. We're doing everything we can to make sure that the communities are at front, the social impact can be minimized, identify what are the potential risks, and then setting up mitigation measures and plan towards this. And that's why we believe in this, our case, because it is in how we do business, not just in Indonesia, but in all parts of Gurin in the region.
Is there any challenge that you particularly face when you are trying to implement the ESG principle within the locations and the surrounding of your project?
Thank you. I think that's a very good question in implementing ESG. First, by all standards and by our way of doing business, Gurin does need to do that, and we are doing it not just in Indonesia but also in other parts of the world, in Asia Pacific. It requires some mapping and identifying of what are the conditions, the baseline, how the communities are, and we are doing it. So we're in the progress of conducting these studies, we're in the progress of developing the project. Anything identified will need to go through a thorough consultation process, getting the communities on board, understanding what their needs are, and being able to blend in with the society and the communities and the environment, because it is an ESG based project, and we still want to comply with the ESG requirements. So at the moment, that's where we are at, and we're looking forward to working with the communities who are happy to work with us.
Okay, last but not least, Mr. Enda, what do you think is the most crucial key to help accelerate the transition to renewable energy, not only in Indonesia, but also across the region?
Oh, that's probably beyond my pay grade, but let me try my stab. Personally, I think being able to do it justly is important, because this energy transition isn't a fast something that happens overnight or over a year. It needs to be carefully consideration. We've learned recently through world incidents and throughout the decade that energy security is needed, and that transition needs to be stable and smooth, and in a particular way adjustable to the country's appetite and the country's ability. We see that not just in Indonesia, we also see that across the region, and we are happy to say that we are a witness and we are active in supporting the Asia Pacific region to transition. So I think there's probably a lot of varieties in what are the challenges and what are moving forward, but I think being able to make that political commitment in a safe and careful manner is important.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Enda, for coming to the interview. We are so honored to have you here, and we wish you all the best luck for Gurin Energy's development and projects across the region.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
So all in all, the key to energy transition is not just the blended finance and the collaboration between the public and private sectors to support the government, but also to ensure that the ESG principle will always be implemented within the surroundings of the projects, and to ensure that the transition to renewable energy both in Indonesia or across the region will not come at certain ecological risk and ecological cost. And not only that, but Indonesia and also Southeast Asia region in a broader context are also developing many interesting projects that we hopefully can see later in the future. And that was the interview with Mr. Enda Ginting, the Country Manager of Indonesia at Gurin Energy. And stay tuned, we will be back later with more stories in See Today Business.